All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar on local leadership and creating change in your community. Here is a look at today's agenda. My name is Claire Platt and I'm the Community Engagement Manager at All In Together, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is dedicated to closing the gender gaps that exist in civic engagement across America. This webinar is brought to you in partnership with Iowa Women Lead Change, an organization that is dedicated to acting as a comprehensive resource to all activities, events, opportunities, and organizations devoted to promoting women's leadership across Iowa. We have also partnered with the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence, an organization that seeks to engage all people in a movement to change the social and political systems that perpetuate violence through education, advocacy, and quality services. So a huge thank you to our partners for being with us here today. We encourage you to join the conversation and stay engaged by following us on social media. We are going to begin by sharing a little bit more about AIT, the status of women's civic engagement and civic leadership in America, and some ways that you can get more engaged. So All In Together equips voting age American women with action-oriented, nonpartisan civic education to realize their full potential as leaders shaping our nation. And we believe that in order to lead fully, women must be leading in three spheres: the personal, the professional, and the political. And we have seen great emphasis over the last 50 years placed on women's leadership in the first two spheres, the personal and the professional. For example, during the 60s and the 70s, there was a focus on women's personal rights and freedoms, including gender equality within the household. Then in the 80s and 90s, we saw a greater focus on gender-based violence and gender equality in the workplace, with issues like equal pay and workplace sexual harassment coming to the forefront of the women's movement. However, women's political leadership has received less attention, and women's leadership in politics still lags behind our male counterparts. And in 2018, women still only make up 20% of our US Congress, and women of color only make up 7.1%. And this is a really big deal because our politicians create the legal frameworks that impact our lives in profound ways every day. And without a diverse group of women at the table, our experiences and our unique needs go unaccounted for. But fast forward to today, 2018 is obviously a very exciting year for women in politics. Record numbers of women are running for elected offices, and we saw the rise of the Me Too movement, which shed light on pervasive issues of gender-based violence and power dynamics that still hinder women's freedom and success today. And it's easy for us to feel like the gender gap is closing. However, we still have a lot of work to do. According to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index in 2017, the US ranks 96th globally in gender equality, largely because of the gender gaps that still exist in our political system. And as you can see, this line is moving in the wrong direction. Our global ranking has actually declined from 54th in 2014 to 96th in 2017. That is a really big drop. It's also important to keep in mind that we have seen this decline despite ranking #1 in women's educational attainment. So it's certainly not because women lack the credentials. So today, we're going to ask you to get engaged and take action on the issues that matter most to you. But the reality is that we all lead really busy lives and our time is often very limited. And with so many different issues, it can be difficult to focus. And for many of us, this leads to what we call analysis paralysis. We feel overwhelmed by everything going on and by all of the issues that we could be engaged around, and so we end up doing nothing. This is why we encourage you to pick a few issues to focus on and be dedicated to. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can identify which issues those are for you. So in order to determine your issue priorities, think about the issues that fall in the center of this Venn diagram. These are issues that you are passionate about, have special expertise or experience in, and are urgent. So when thinking about your passions, think about your voting issues. What are the most important issues to you when determining whether or not you can support a candidate running for office? You can also think about how you choose to spend your free time, which causes you volunteered for or donated to in the past. And choosing issues that you're actually passionate about is so important because this is what is going to sustain your efforts and keep you engaged, even when life gets busy and advocacy feels most difficult. The next criteria is experience or expertise. And this does not mean that you need a PhD or that you need to know everything that there is to know about a specific topic. Remember that your experiences are valid simply because they are yours. So think about issues that have impacted you personally. Personal stories go a long way when contacting your legislators. And in fact, these stories are often what your legislators use when trying to garner support for legislation. Expertise can come in many different forms, from the job that you hold, to the region that you live in, to the experiences that you've had within your own family. It's all relevant and it's all powerful. The last criteria is urgency. So this is where you can ask yourself things like, is this issue time sensitive? Is there legislation being currently debated in Congress? Is there a vote coming up? And is it being overlooked? And this will help you prioritize which issues you should be focusing on today. So now that we've talked through the ways that you can identify your issue priorities, we are now going to focus in on how you can take action and become a leader in your local community by talking to two leaders from the state of Iowa. So it is now my pleasure to welcome Tiffany O'Donnell, who is the CEO of Iowa Women Lead Change, and Lindsay Pingle, the Director of Community Engagement for the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So welcome, ladies, and thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so before we dive in, I'd like to encourage those of you tuning in live to submit your questions in the comment box on your screen so we can answer them at the end of the conversation. And with that, we can get started. My first question to both of you, Tiffany and Lindsay, is why are you all in, and what inspired you to take on the leadership position that you currently hold in your organization and community? And Lindsay, I'll pass it to you first.
Okay, thanks, Claire. For me, really, my passion for social change, equity, and policy that protects all Iowans from violent crime is what inspires me in my work each and every day, and to be, quote unquote, all in together. When I joined the coalition 4 years ago, I saw my position as an opportunity to advance the mission, vision, and values of the organization to a larger population, while also helping to give a voice to women, men, children, and communities impacted by intimate partner violence. This epidemic impacts approximately 35,000 Iowans each year. It's a topic that is incredibly hard to talk about, especially if you're someone who has been fortunate not to experience it. And it's even harder to acknowledge if you're someone who has. So for me, coming to work every day and trying to make the conversation a little bit easier and get things put in place so that all people can feel free from violence is really what inspires me.
Thanks, Lindsay. And with that, Tiffany, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Claire. Well, welcome everybody. I just want to thank everybody for taking, their time over lunch. I know we often put ourselves last as women, so I applaud you, and I hope you give yourself a pat on the back today for investing your time in yourself today. My journey into this leadership position really was fairly organic, and it's what I would suggest to the group today too, that that's often, I think, the best way to truly find your passion. I work for a women's leadership organization. I am a woman. I have 2 daughters and have been raised by a really strong woman, and my biggest male ally, initially my father, and now certainly my husband, is my biggest male ally today. But I came upon it because it really was intuitive. This was an organization that I was interested in as a consumer, if you will, as an attendee. The programming that they did really spoke to me as a woman in the workplace, a woman who'd grown up in the workplace. I'm about to turn 50, so it gives you kind of an idea of generationally where I fall and how times have changed in the workplace for me. So the mission of IWLC is to advance, develop, and promote women, their organizations, and to impact the regional economy. So this is a really intuitive thing for me, obviously, as I think it would be hopefully for a lot of women on this call. I became all in once I saw, first of all, the need as I got closer to the organization. I saw the need for leadership development. I saw incredible gaps that existed. I saw where, maybe I could offer some expertise or at least share my experience in some of these areas. And so I gradually got more and more involved in the organization. As I'm sure many of you have discovered, once you get more involved, sometimes it becomes clear that this is where you need to be. And that was really how I approach every organization with which I'm associated. Is this an organization for which I would seek leadership, whether that be a board position, a committee lead position? That really gave me an indication of how I truly felt about it. So when you talk about passion, Claire, that really is one of my guideposts. Is this an organization that I would support financially if I wasn't involved? That is a question that I asked myself about this organization. Is it an organization? Is it a cause that I would that I would encourage my children to be a part of? Absolutely. And so, I kept checking boxes off, certainly for this organization, but really all of the nonprofits and causes with which I've associated myself. These are the boxes that I check. And I encourage, all the folks on this call today to do the same thing. I feel like if you're passionate about it too, your odds are much greater that you'll be successful at it and have a greater impact.
Well, thank you. And certainly, Tiffany and Lindsay, that dovetails perfectly with what we just talked about and seeking something that covers urgency, passion, and your expertise. So thank you for sharing. And my next question to the both of you is, what do you see as the biggest barriers to women's leadership in your work and in your community? So Lindsay, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks. I think the domestic violence, or if we want to talk a little bit bigger, the violence against women movement is unique in the fact that since the beginning, for decades, women have actually been seen as the experts in this field. When women came together, in the 60s and the 70s and organized and acknowledged that there was an issue, they started to advocate for policy change, not only to keep all people safe in their home, but against sexual harassment and gender-based violence. And they came together collectively to utilize their voices. And as a result, they started to make change. Individuals started to seek services for domestic violence and started to find safety in their homes. They started talking about sexual harassment in the workplace, and companies were putting policies into place to make sure everyone was treated equally. There's a lot of things about this movement that just make it really unique, and that's really empowering and something I'm really proud to be a part of. But at the same time, obviously, the domestic violence field, probably the biggest barrier we face is that it still seems taboo to talk. So in order to get over that barrier, and again, we've been working on this for 40, 50 years and still have pushback, we just need to keep talking about it. We need to bring it out of the shadows because it's an epidemic that thrives in silence. But once we shed light on it and we start talking about it and making it more acceptable to talk about, is really the way that we're going to get over it. Another barrier that I see and we recognize at our organization is certain systems, certain services that we have available, not only in Iowa, but across the country, that are working to help survivors aren't always accessible to everyone, especially when I think of communities of color and some other marginalized communities. Calling law enforcement when a crime is happening or they're being hurt in their home isn't always the first thing that they want to do. So what are some creative ways that we can get around that to still help a survivor, but not bring in some of those established systems per se, that not everyone is comfortable with. And finally, we also recognize that leadership positions in our line of work are largely held by white women, and opportunities for women of color to advance to leadership roles within our work has been lacking for several years. And that's something that we have been and will continue to overcome to make sure that all women, all men, all people can find a leadership and empowerment within this movement.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Lindsay. And I'll hand it to you, Tiffany, for your insights.
Thank you. And Lindsay, I'm so glad that you mentioned that last point about marginalized communities, communities that aren't always lifted up and thought of for the leadership positions. And what's interesting, the data shows us that many of these communities, these diverse communities, are leaving organizations behind. They're going on their own. When you look at the number of women-owned businesses specifically owned by minorities, that number is drastically higher in the last couple of years than Caucasian women starting their own businesses. And I think the growth trend is much greater in minority communities. And it really is, you have to wonder, how much of that really is that they're just kind of, throwing their hands up saying, I got to move on. You're not going to put me at the top. I'm going to create my own opportunity. So I'm glad you pointed that out. And there may be some people on the call that feel the same way about that as well. I'm done trying to break through the glass ceiling. I'm just going to go build my own ceiling. Right. When I look at barriers to women's leadership specifically, if we're really zeroing in on that leadership component, I see it twofold. I see it from an individual standpoint. Confidence is far and away, our own self-imposed barriers. And certainly when it comes to running for office or going for that higher position, you've all seen the numbers by now that show, women really want to have a majority of all the qualifications before we'll even put our hat in the ring. Whereas, a guy in the same position figures he'll just learn it when he gets there. There is a confidence that we lack in that area, and it's not to any fault of our own. Honestly, we come by it honestly. We've been raised, and our culture has really, valued us for following the rules, and we always had to have more degrees and more certifications in order to be considered as qualified as our male counterparts. So we really come by this honestly, but nonetheless, it exists. We're the ones who often say, I'm not ready for that position. I don't want to run for office. I don't want to have to fight with people. What if I lose? There are all these, and I'm just as guilty of it. I always go to the worst result first. And really, I shudder to think how many opportunities that's kept me from, fear of failure. We're fairly risk averse. So that keeps us, from really putting ourselves out there and taking a chance on our futures. So that's from an individual basis. And then when you look at, cultural and organizational, I touched upon that, a little bit earlier, just unconscious bias in the workplace. Who do we consider, we're not even meaning to do this. We don't mean to do this. I do believe, there are people that just don't know what they don't know, but yet they tend to choose people who look like them. So those are organizational and cultural barriers. And I think for women specifically too, we look at the structure of the workplace, the structure of politics. We've just now seen a woman being able to, bring a baby into Congress. So, the structure alone can be a barrier from a very basic level. If being a CFO at an organization requires 60 hours a week, it's going to be kind of hard to get a lot of women I know to raise their hands to do that. But I think what we have to do today is ask, why is it 60 hours? And plenty of the women that I know that would be capable for that CFO position could do that job in 40 hours at work, and would probably be willing to do a little bit of work at home once the kids are asleep, or they've achieved their commitments in their private lives as well. So yeah, I mean, on an individual basis, we got to raise our hands. We got to step out there. We have to take more risks. On an organizational level, we just need to ask those tough questions of the existing structures.
Thank you to both of you. And I know that the both of you did allude to this next question in your previous answers, but what are some really specific things that individuals can do, and as a community as well, to break down these barriers, or at least to begin to, and especially for women not directly involved in politics?
I mean, it probably sounds simpler than what it is, but really for me, and speaking at a political level and speaking to women and men who are not directly involved in politics, is vote. Vote in every single upcoming election. If you're looking for political change with that, your vote is your voice. It's a privilege. It's a right that I remind myself a lot that there's still many women across the world who do not have the right to vote. Their voice is not accounted for. I think that today politics can be really intimidating. We're in a political climate that I think is new to a lot of us, and it can seem really intimidating. But there's so many ways that you can, still get involved and still kind of try to figure out, what you want to see at a political level. And I mean, really, Claire, you highlighted it earlier. I would just encourage people to really think about, what their values are, what's important to them, what they stand for. And, whether it's, your community school board election, or it's more sending someone from your community to the state house, or looking bigger, like the election coming up in November at the U.S. House and Representatives level. But go online and read about the candidates. See if your priorities and your values align with theirs. That's something easy you can do. I mean, you could do it over lunch. I mean, several of you are here today listening to us on this webinar. So take a few minutes just to read up on who's running for different things and see what you like and you don't like about them. Or, there's community forums that are really going to be picking up in the next, 3 or 4 months in your community. I would encourage anyone to attend one. Just go and listen. You don't have to ask questions. No one's going to call on you. You can't have a right or a wrong answer, but, step out of your comfort zone. I think as women, Tiffany really alluded to this. I think that we sometimes stay back because we're not comfortable stepping in, and we have a place at every table and in every single room. And we need to remember that in the political sphere, or in the personal sphere, in your professional, it really doesn't matter. We need to remember that. And finally, if you're feeling a little bit more confident, see if you can find a networking event, with other women in your community who are aligned with your values, to kind of pick their brains politically to see what's going on. And I would just encourage everyone, and I think this sounds kind of cliche, but women are critical to the electoral process. I mean, we are critical. How many times did we hear 2 years ago, and with all of the elections coming up, how important, how vital women were to who's getting put into office? That's incredibly empowering as a woman. So I really encourage people to just make sure they are involved in every single electoral process you possibly can. Voting is fun. It's really fun. And again, it's a privilege. It's your right. And remember how vital and important you are to making change, because from where I sit, working in an organization that has evolved out of the higher women's movement. When women come together, change happens, and it's awesome.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I would also just add that if folks are looking for a place to get informed on who represents them and where they stand on the issues, if you go to aitogether.org/action center, we have a great tool there. That's a great way to look up your representatives and your senators and get started. And with that, Tiffany, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, well, specifically talking about politics and running for office, I would submit that there's never been a more important time for women to engage. And my reasoning may not be, why, it might surprise you. I mean, certainly, to Lindsay, to your point, we, more than ever, we just really need to be aware of what's happening, taking as much control back from the things that are out of our control, if you will, and voting certainly to do that. But I think, more importantly than ever, women as leaders, our strengths, and again, this is all data. This is data driven. Our strengths are that we are collaborative, we are relational, we are communicative. These are innate skills that women are known to have, and they are what make us amazing leaders, in general. I submit it's time for us more than ever to put our, to take a chance, if we're at least considering running for office, that the time is now to show everybody how it's done. Right now, I don't need to tell everybody on this call just how kind of toxic the conversations have gotten, and honestly, in politics, but it also kind of seeps out into other places in our lives. And I feel like women are just the ones to show the guys, and actually some of the women right now in positions of power, exactly how this should be done. To use the cliche, it's an amazing phrase. I hate to call it a cliche, but we really are the change that we want to see in the world. I mean, a lot of my friends are complaining about conversations and the dialogue and just how low we've gone. We need to be the ones that say this really isn't effective and this really isn't how it's done. And we need to leverage those innate skills that we have to show how this should be done properly. So that's my, political soapbox about why we shouldn't be involved. And sure, it involves politics, but more than anything, I think it involves culture, and it involves, our role in really, bringing us back to where we should be, at least in terms of decorum and conversation and communication. I also think from a practical and tactical tip for those on the call, I believe success breeds success. So if it's baby steps that you need, if you just need to dip your toe into leadership or even just engagement, find one of those organizations or causes for which you're passionate and dip your toe in it. Maybe go to a meeting, maybe attend an event like I did with IWLC. Start small. And then, once you realize, where your passion lies, then take another step. And I think when you're successful, every time we're successful at something that we didn't know we could do before, it's really empowering. And I believe it's paradigm shifting. I believe once you put yourself out there to do something that you never imagined you could do, the world is your oyster. So success breeds success. Put yourself out there. You may not be successful the first time or as successful as you imagine, but again, take the risk. You will be successful eventually, and I believe that's what will encourage you to at least get the confidence to continue to do more.
Great. And, for people who are really ready to take a step and dive in, would both of you spend some time talking about what initiatives or issues you're most focused on right now and how people can jump in and get involved?
Sure. For us right now, what we're focused on at the coalition, it doesn't change a lot in terms of when I say we're going to continue to address issues about inequality and look at ways that we can address disparities and discrimination within the systems we work with. We want to ensure access to justice for all survivors of violent crime is available. We, we acknowledge and address, we acknowledge that there are severe racial disparities in the criminal justice system, and we want to ensure that justice and practices are in place so that all survivors are safe from the people who are harming them, and find the results that they need, which is sometimes outside of the criminal justice system. So we're always looking at innovative, and again, I think I mentioned it before, non-traditional ways that we can help survivors find freedom and a future free from violence. We're always going to be continuing our fight and pressure at the legislature to make sure that they're investing in victim services. We want to make sure that every survivor has access to quality, comprehensive, culturally competent services, so that all families can find safety and healing from a violent situation. And I would encourage anyone, at the Coalition, we have 21 programs that cover the entire state of Iowa, working with survivors in all 99 counties. So I would encourage everyone on this call to learn more about what agency is in your area. You can visit our website, www.icadv.org, to find the program in your area, but I would reach out to them and see how you can get involved. What volunteer opportunities are open. I would connect with myself after this call to see what you can do from a political spectrum, in terms of how you can help us advocate in the upcoming months as we come to a huge election year here in Iowa, and also when the second part of session starts in 2019. We always appreciate your voices. And finally, I think one way that people can get involved is just acknowledging again that intimate partner violence is happening and it's impacting people in your community, your friends and your family. And by acknowledging that and starting to create conversation, really is how we see change and we find safety for survivors. Again, it's overcoming a barrier of keeping something that is ugly and non-pleasant to talk about, but bringing it to the forefront. And again, from a political side, letting our legislatures know that, what we stand for is a bipartisan issue. It affects both sides of the table per se, but when the parties can come together, at the state level and nationally, change can really happen for women to find safety, and every single person deserves to be safe in their home.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. Certainly many wonderful things for people to get involved in with the Coalition. So thank you so much for sharing. Tiffany, would you like to share what you are focused on right now with IWLC?
Sure. Very briefly, because I'm sure you probably have some questions coming in. I will just tell you that we come at women's leadership development in two ways. I touched upon the individual aspect, where we really want to empower women to use the skills that they already have and to improve the leadership skills that they may desire, and to achieve the seat whether it's a C-suite, leadership at a PTA, leadership at a school, at a home. We really want to give them practical and tactical tools to do that through our conferences and workshops, by bringing in the experts and really providing that leadership development for the individual, whether it's around confidence, whether it's about difficult conversations, whether it's about unconscious bias, financial acumen, all these issues that often hold us back to ascending to leadership roles. We want to provide that development. From a structural standpoint, we recognize we can offer development for individuals all we want, but if they're going to go to a corporate structure or an organizational structure that doesn't support that or isn't ready for that leadership, then we're just wasting our time on all fronts. So we also come at it from an organizational aspect, from a strategic aspect. So we work inside companies with initiatives like our public-private partnership called the Epic Corporate Challenge, which is with Delta Dental as our private supporter, and the state of Iowa, and the governor as our honorary chair of that really works to get inside organizations. Many of you, if you work outside of the home, have this opportunity for your organization to become an Epic Corporate Challenge member. It's free of charge. Information is on our website to do that. And basically what this is where the rubber hits the road for us. You know, I always say I'm not here for my health. I mean, I love talking about women's leadership, but I really actually want to see the number of women grow inside these organizations. So this is our opportunity to invite these companies to take a critical look at 5 key metrics. And these organizations oftentimes have this information already at their fingertips. They just haven't looked at it in this way. We look at the number of women in senior leadership in the organization. How does it recruit women? How does it retain women? How many women are on their board of directors? And then finally, what does pay equity look like? And for those of you who saw the CEO of Salesforce on 60 Minutes a couple months ago, it's fabulous. If you haven't seen it, by the way, you can look it up online. But this is a guy that really thought he was, and I'm sure he is, you know, fairly forward thinking, fairly pragmatic, you know, certainly focused on equality. He really thought he was doing a great job at Salesforce. And when he took a critical look at pay equity, he found they were sorely lacking in that area. So the Epic Corporate Challenge invites companies to do the same thing. Take a hard look at these 5 key metrics. They report it confidentially through Iowa Workforce Development, and then we compile those results and release them at an annual meeting with the governor in February. So the Epic Corporate Challenge is a very specific initiative that is free for organizations. And in addition, you're provided free programming with peer sessions as an Epic Corporate Challenge member. So yeah, that's how we're working strategically. And then we just invite folks to attend our workshops and conferences for individual development.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We now are going to turn to the audience. So for those of you tuning in online, if you do have any questions, this is your time to submit them into the box on your screen, and we will ask Tiffany and Lindsay to respond. And I know we already have had some come in, so I'll start with a question from Alice, who asks our panelists, is there a list of non-governmental organizations in Iowa which are relevant to the women's agenda? If so, where is this list and how can it be accessed?
You know, Lindsay, maybe you're aware of that. I'm not aware of a central list.
I am not, but that is an excellent idea that absolutely, that's like a light bulb moment for me that someone should put together. Unfortunately, I don't know one off the top of my head, and that's really sad. I apologize.
Well, it's a great first action step.
Yep.
You know, even if there's not a list, Lindsay and Tiffany, do you have any recommendations for someone who wants to get plugged in, even if they're not working from a list, but maybe how you go about looking for a specific organization, if you have an interest, or any action steps that we can give to Alice and the rest of the folks tuning in?
You know, I would suggest even just a Google search, you know, of your location, your community, and maybe a cause for which you're interested. That's probably where I would start, and then use my network. You know, really ask to see what my friends are doing.
I agree 100%. I think it all goes back to kind of making that list of like, you know, what are you passionate about? What do you care about? What social service organizations do you want to get involved with? And definitely connect with them. And then, of course, utilize your personal and professional networks.
Great. Second question, also from Alice, is how does the women's movement in Iowa connect to the national and international women's movement?
Sure. We, the coalition here in Iowa, we have staff who actually work at the national level. So that's very, very exciting. Our organization has always kind of tried to look bigger than just what is going on here in Iowa. So there is actually, I would encourage all of you after this to check out this organization. It's called Move to End Violence. It's a national network of leaders across the country. who have come together and really kind of looked at the work and the systems and the services that they have helped to put in place over the last 40 years, and started to analyze communities that have maybe been left out of what's available to help in terms of a unsafe domestic violence and or sexual assault situation, and looked at new untraditional, creative ways to serve everyone. The organization Move to End Violence, it's www.movetoendviolence.org. They have an amazing plethora of information that they're looking to change how the movement works moving forward nationally. I would encourage all of you to look into that. And I can say that really their key is to bring in those communities, specifically marginalized communities, and really put them at the center of our work. Because we feel that when we can get to the most marginalized individual who we view as female, if we can find safety for her and all of the services and systems that will impact her future in a positive way, then we feel that all people, regardless of age, gender, race, will all be served. So to save you guys like a 2-hour plethora of going into every detail, I would just encourage all of you to look after this to Google Move to End Violence and read a little bit more about the amazing work that we're a part of nationally.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. Our next question comes from Heidi, who asks, how do we bring to the forefront of the conversation things like gender-based violence or other needs that are currently really taboo? And I think this is certainly on top of a lot of people's minds as we are currently experiencing the Me Too moment. I'm seeing this more and more in the media. So either one of you wants to take that question.
Certainly, I can talk a little bit about that. Again, I think it's just recognizing, and I don't want to say accepting, because I don't think that we should ever accept that intimate partner violence is happening, but we need to. But accepting it, recognizing it, and starting to talk about it really can make a difference. And I think that the Me Too movement is an amazing example of women coming forward to talk about very uncomfortable situations, but collaboratively using their voices for change. And it was kind of like a domino effect. One person came forward, and that gave confidence and support for more people to come together. And soon you had this group of women and men, really worldwide, that started sharing their experiences and really advocating for change and creating the conversation. This intimate partner violence, gender-based violence, it really is about starting a conversation. And once we start the conversation, once we make it known, then we make it more comfortable to talk about, and we can really start having crucial conversations around it. We can start having intellectual conversations about it, and we'll feel more confident when we're looking at talking with our legislatures, or say you're someone who's been experiencing harassment in the workplace, maybe going to your superiors to talk about what's happening and look and see what type of policies can change in a corporate or nonprofit sector to make sure that everyone feels safe at work. I know it sounds simple, and it's a lot bigger than that. But again, we have to bring the problem into the forefront in order for people to talk about it, because if we don't, then it continues to hide in silence, and that's where it thrives.
Thanks, Lindsay. And with that, that is all the time that we have for this conversation today. Thank you, Tiffany and Lindsay, for joining us and for sharing your insights. I know you gave our audience a lot to think about and a lot of actions to take after we wrap up. And thank you to those of you who joined us for this webinar online, and we hope that you will get engaged and stay connected to us in the future.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you.